order. Welcome to meeting number 32 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either English, floor English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. We appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. So thank you. Before I jump into the witnesses, I'd just like to welcome our two new members to the committee. Thank you very much. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all members of this committee. You know, I think we've worked very well together with these issues, and you know, I just want to say thank you to all of the members, especially our folks on the left side here, and of course the right, just for working together and to champion these issues. Agriculture, as we know, represents a large percentage of our GDP. It employs many people across this country, and it's helped build this country. So I just want to say thank you for your hard work and dedication. Yes, sir.
Thank you for that, but please do never again say I'm on the left side.
I'll go to the right. Then everyone will be angry at me. Yes, MP Chatel.
Oui, merci, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to applaud my colleagues for the excellent cooperation we've had in recent months, and I hope that will continue exactly as before. We have completed some very important studies, and we're in the middle of a very important and relevant one. So for myself and on behalf of my colleagues, we have a great committee, and I'm very proud of it and of the work we accomplish and of our cooperation. Thank you.
Juste vous dire merci. Je pense que c'est.
Thank you. I think there are some fears involved, but I think it is very good of you to make that comment. It's appreciated.
Thank you very much. Pursuant to the Standing Orders 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee is resuming its study on business risk management programs in Canada's agriculture sector. I'd like to welcome our witnesses from the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. You made it just in time. I know you had a bit of a delay downstairs, but thank you so much for being here. We have Mr. Hubbard from the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, and online we have Keystone Agricultural Producers, Colin Hornby, who's the General Manager. Welcome to each and every one of you, and thank you for being here. You'll have up to 5 minutes each, and then we'll open it up for questions from the members. We'll start with Mr. Hubbard for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members, for the invitation to join you today. It's a privilege to be here on behalf of the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, representing 296 rural municipalities and the thousands of producers who make up the backbone of our province's economy. Saskatchewan's producers have built a reputation as some of the most resilient and innovative farmers in the world. But that resilience has been tested by extreme weather events, market volatility, and rising input costs. Business risk management programs are intended to provide stability and confidence in those times of uncertainty. Unfortunately, what we hear from producers across this province is that many of the programs, structures, and eligibility requirements are failing to meet that goal. Our members consistently raise concerns about how eligible expenses are defined within programs such as Agri-Stability, Agri-Invest, and Agri-Insurance. The issue isn't only the complexity, but the disconnect between what is considered eligible under the program and what producers actually spend to operate their farms today. Costs for fuel, fertilizer, freight, and interest have grown dramatically, yet these real, unavoidable expenses are often capped, limited, or excluded in ways that erode the effectiveness of BRM support. As a result, the very producers these programs are meant to help are too often left without meaningful assistance when they need it the most. Many have found themselves paying into programs that simply don't respond when margins collapse or when unforeseen costs cut deeply into operations. The intention behind BRM programs is sound, but the way eligibility criteria are applied, particularly around input costs and depreciation, means that the calculation of support does not reflect the true cost structure of modern farming in Saskatchewan. I also, I also want to stress the importance of flexibility and timeliness. In agriculture, decisions are made in real time. When support programs take months to deliver assistance or require complex reconciliations that push payments well past the period of need, that delay can make the difference between staying afloat and leaving the industry for good. That's why SARM supports calls for program modernization, clearer definitions of eligible expenses, faster mechanisms for payment, and improved regional adaptability so that program design recognizes the unique cost pressures and production realities of prairie agriculture. Producers' confidence in BRM programs has declined because the rules fell out of step within the realities on the ground. Our goal is not to increase dependency, but to ensure fairness, that the programs producers pay into actually cover the risks and costs they face. Saskatchewan producers are proud to manage the risk responsibility, but that management must be matched by federal programs that offer real relevance and value. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, SARM appreciates your commitment to reviewing these programs and to hearing directly from those affected. The future competitiveness and sustainability of our agriculture sector depend on ensuring the safety net fits the modern farm business. I look forward to discussing ways to strengthen BRM programs so they serve producers as they are not as they were in the generation ago. Thank you.
Much, sir. Next, we'll go to the Canadian Federation of Agriculture for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies for our lateness. We did have some issues at security, so appreciate everyone's patience here. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Scott Ross. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. The CFA is Canada's largest general farm organization, representing more than 190,000 farmers and farm families across the country. Canada's agriculture sector is operating in a risk environment that has changed fundamentally and continues to change faster than our current BRM tools were designed to handle. Producers today are facing climate volatility, extreme and recurring weather events, geopolitical instability, input cost spikes, animal and plant disease pressures, and ongoing market uncertainty. Events that were once viewed as rare or extraordinary are now increasingly routine. Yet many of our core BRM programs were built for a different risk profile, grounded in more traditional production and market-based risks, without the underlying context of ever-increasing climate volatility. As a result, we are seeing growing misalignment between the risks producers face and the tools available to manage them. Programs have become increasingly fragmented and understood as standalone instruments rather than as a coordinated toolbox, creating gaps, inconsistent incentives, and uneven coverage across commodities. The result at the farm level is declining resilience, tighter margins, and rising stress, highlighting that a uniform, one-size-fits-all BRM approach is ill-suited to managing increasingly diverse and evolving risks. Industry's message is not simply that BRM needs fixing. It's that BRM must be reimagined as part of a broader Government of Canada approach that cuts across all government departments to leverage the full breadth of programs and incentives available. Our vision is for agriculture to be treated as a national growth engine, one that strengthens food security, supports innovation and sustainability, creates value across the supply chain, and expands domestic and global market opportunities. To do that, we are recommending that the next policy framework support 4 strategic priorities. First, it should be designed to support growth across the sector by enabling investment and expansion rather than discouraging it. This will require federal investments focused on high-impact areas supported by policies across government to remove barriers and unlock scale. In other words, we will need to look beyond the borders of agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at how we can support a sector development approach to growth that includes coordinated investment and attention across the Government of Canada. Second, it needs to drive innovation by improving coordination and investment in new technologies from research to commercialization and adoption. Third, it needs to support resilience through flexibility by creating more choice in risk management programs, including greater focus on prevention and adaptation versus solely ad hoc responses. Practically speaking, this means exploring innovative approaches and alternative service delivery models to supplement core risk management programs like agri-insurance and agri-stability with more targeted program offerings. Canada's agriculture sector is diverse. A one-size-fits-all BRM approach no longer works for all producers. Some sectors still lack effective insurance tools, including areas like forage and livestock price insurance. Tailored solutions are needed that are better adapted to the unique risk profile of Canada's diverse commodities. Finally, the next policy framework needs to be anchored to the goal of efficiency by simplifying programs and embedding accountability to tangible strategic outcomes. Producers are navigating multiple portals, reporting requirements, and program rules across governments. Industry is calling for a single federal portal, streamlined delivery, and a shift towards outcome-based performance measurement focused on productivity and competitiveness rather than participation numbers or administrative metrics. In closing, we believe the core question for this committee is not whether BRM should cost more or less, but whether it is fit for purpose in the risk environment Canadian farmers now face. A modern BRM framework must work with, not against, growth and innovation, reduce reliance on ad hoc crisis responses, provide real choice and flexibility for producers, deliver better value for taxpayers, and strengthen resilience across the entire agri-food system. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We appreciate the committee's attention to this issue and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll go online now to Keystone Agricultural Producers. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members, for the invitation to speak today on the topic of BRM programs and the next within the context of the next policy framework. My name is Colin Hornby. I'm the General Manager of Keystone Ag Producers. We are Manitoba's general farm policy organization, providing a unified voice for all farmers on issues that affect agriculture, whether it be livestock, crops, specialty products, and everything else in between. And we are also members of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and I'm glad to be here with some other prairie folks as well from SARM. Manitoba farmers grow what the world needs. With the majority of our products destined for export markets, it's critical that any discussion around programs that aim to support ag production in Canada is focused on one theme: competitiveness. The majority of farmers sell into a global market and in many commodities are at its mercy. As mentioned by the chair yourself prior, 1 in 8 jobs in Canada are attributed to agriculture sector, representing 7% of the GDP. So the direction of the next policy framework matters not only to farmers, but to the millions of Canadians whose livelihoods rely on this industry. Before I give some recommendations on BRM programs, I want to talk quickly about the next policy framework and the 6 main areas of focus that we believe will make for a more proactive and effective framework. The first is growth. Sustained growth in Canadian agriculture depends on expanding market opportunities, supporting value-add activity, and enabling producers and processors to invest with confidence. The next policy framework must reinforce market development and diversification, both domestic and abroad, and support value chain approaches for processing. The government must also invest in their international presence in market with trading partners to deal with non-tariff barriers to trade. The second theme is competitiveness. Both cost pressures and structural barriers must be addressed to strengthen Canada's position as a reliable, innovative, and sustainable supplier of goods. Prioritizing productivity enhancement, efficiency, and value addition and eligibility criteria in any FPT programming is critical. This also includes ensuring research investments maintain and focus on public good research while supporting public-private partnerships for mutual benefit. The third is resilience. This is to maintain a foundational objective of the next policy framework and evolving business risk management programming to reflect today's risk profile, as discussed by the other witnesses, should be a part of it. Focusing on equity of outcomes rather than uniformity of programs will help farmers have options to tailor their risk management support. The fourth is innovation. This must be elevated as a core pillar of the framework, including improved coordination between FPT governments and the private sector around a common vision for Canada's innovation continuum from research to adoption. Innovation outcomes should be based on collective, measurable goals. Two other ones to highlight are red tape reduction and outcome-based policy design. Regulatory burden, as the committee well knows, is consistently identified as a barrier to innovation and is something that you have put forward in a report recently in December. Prioritizing high-impact regulatory bottlenecks rather than incremental changes and reducing administrative burden in funding programs should be a priority, including many of those recommendations you put forward in December. When it comes to BRM programs, there's some specific recommendations I would also highlight. On the advanced payments program, we would like to see a permanent extension of the $350,000 interest-free portion and index all future increases to inflation. Maintaining the payment cap of $6 million per program year as well is something we would like to see. On agri-stability, increasing the compensation rate to 90% permanently with the recent increase just for the one program year. Increasing early payments from 50 to 75% to ensure better cash flow in challenging years, and increasing the trigger rate from 70 to 85% of reference margin. On Agri-Invest, we'd like to see the agri-environmental risk assessment requirement cross-compliance removed, which I can discuss more in depth. Establishing an accreditation program for farm income tax preparers to reduce verification costs on BRM claims, and have all levels of government increase investment in extension and research to help prevent losses and reduce reliance on reactive BRM tools. We would also like to see an impact analysis for the return on investment for BRM programs, specifically with agri-stability. Having this robust data illustrating Canada's investment return for tax dollars spent on BRM programs would help reassure governments that farm support ends up increasing ag's contribution to the GDP and helps the Canadian economy at large. And as well would complement the concept of unleashing agriculture as referred to in the Barton report. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. We'll go to 6 minutes to the Conservatives. Mr. Bonk.
Thank you. I'd like to start off by asking Mr. Huber some questions. So we're about equidistant, or we live about the same distance from the Indian Head Research Center that has been announced that's been closed, and we're both well aware of the good work they've done there when it comes to things like zero till with Guy Lafond and Jim there that did that good work where it's basically had more impact when it comes to environmental protection of agriculture or sustainability or carbon sequestration than just about anything else that's been developed in agriculture, especially in Canada. I was just wondering, since you represent a large organization made up of primarily farmers who are on the ground every day working in this field, how many of your members have reached out to you and told you that they're happy that this research center is closing?
Not one.
I kind of thought that might be the answer. So you had mentioned in your preamble about agri-stability and agri-insurance and some of the ineligible expenses that producers aren't able to claim. Could you maybe expand on that, because we haven't heard that yet in this committee?
Okay, well, a lot of our expenses that aren't eligible, and we all know the rising inflationary costs that have incurred to producers in the last number of years, especially the last 4 or 5. And it's not all due to tariffs on aluminum and steel, but there's things like land rent that has risen from $25 to possibly $50 an acre 5-6 years ago to well over $100 per acre now. Those expenses aren't eligible. Some of our machinery repairs and things like that, tires and engine overhauls, things like cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and those are expenses that we can't use as an expense for agri-stability. And it takes too long for these programs to react to. We got producers in the west and west central part of the province, as you're familiar with, Mr. Bonk, and they've suffered anywhere from 5 to 9 years of drought. And a lot of them that are enrolled in some of these business risk management programs like Agri-Stability haven't collected a dollar. And we've since heard in the last months that Saskatchewan Crop Insurance are still working on 2024 claims. So, and I mentioned in my comments, that sometimes before you would be eligible to collect some of this money or be entitled to it, the auction sale would be over and farmers would have left the industry. And I think it's so important at this time that in history and in Saskatchewan agriculture, which has 44% of the arable land, and we want to make sure that we can retain as many farm families on that land as possible. Because without some kind of a business risk management tool to sustain agriculture, it also reflects on food sustainability worldwide.
Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit on what you had mentioned in your answer? We'll use the Palliser Triangle, for example. I believe they're in about 7th year now where they would have triggered claims, but a lot of the people can't because the reference, just maybe talk about the reference margin.
Yes, well, I think one of my colleagues next to us, or industry groups, had mentioned something about moving the margins up to 90%, and I think that's important. Now, our provincial government, Saskatchewan, has announced some of those things for a few more eligible expenses to reflect on the livestock industry, but we need those as permanent fixtures. And last summer, they increased it from 70 to 80% for some things, but I think those are things that we need to have as permanent. And when you start losing 20 to 30% of your revenue, that's huge. Especially in agriculture, when your profit margin is very slim. It's not like some other industry components that are 15 to 20% return on investment. Agriculture is very seldom seen that big a return. And I think those are things that have to be changed permanently.
So we've had some talk here about Agri-Invest and how currently it's at 1% of sales. And there's been some talk about increasing it up to 3%. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it should definitely be, because the margin right now, or the eligibility, or the point where to collect, and it's a maximum of $10,000, $1 million, or equity in it. So I think that has to be increased too, because we take the price of farmland, the price of our input costs. It's not even relevant to where it should really be. So.
Next question is going to be for you and Mr. Hornby about cross-compliance. So there's a lot of farmers that are quite concerned. As you know, farmers are probably the best stewards or as green-minded people as you'll ever find, because they rely on the soil health for their livelihood. But they are worried about cross-compliance when it comes to regulations that are made here in Ottawa that don't reflect the realities on the ground. Can you maybe expand on that, and I'll ask both of you for...
Well, we have some of the best productive land in Canada, and it's the newest land. Some of our farmland has only been broke for, just a little over 100 years when our ancestors first settled that. So we have to make sure that land is farmed properly, and we go back and talk a wee bit about the Indian Head research stations in Scott, where they've developed programs there, and along with Jim Halford from Indian Head on direct seeding and soil conservation. Those things are so valuable to preserving our soil. We've almost eliminated soil erosion by wind and water from past years in the 30s and 40s, and we got to be recognized for some of them achievements that producers have innovated on their own with the likes of people like Jim Halford. And
we'll go to the Liberals for 6 minutes. MP Harrison.
Thank you very much. To the CFA, are there any, and if you don't have the example, it's fine, but are there any countries or any of our allies that have gotten it right and have modernized in a way that our producers are asking for in Canada? If you have any examples, or any of the witnesses, if you have an answer.
So I don't think there's every context is different in agriculture globally, and I don't think there's one foreign jurisdiction that says they've got the mix exactly right and we can lift that for Canada's purposes. I will say when we look at some of our major trading partners, the U.S. as an example, they have adopted a much more of a tailored approach to risk management that targets individualized needs and focuses on developing products that are more tailored to the individual needs of some of the diverse segments of their industry. So while I wouldn't suggest the whole model is something we would lift, certainly there are elements of just the responsiveness that's at the heart of that programming model that I think we would like to see adopted to a greater extent in Canada.
Certainly. So in the European Union with their cap, they have a stable baseline income for their producers. Do you think that's something that producers in Canada would be interested in?
Again, I would say the context is so wholly different in the EU relative to Canada that it's hard to lift one isolated element of their programming mix and suggest it would fit in the Canadian context. I think from our perspective, where we see a concern there is the relative net spend of the EU in their agricultural sector relative to Canada, where we are at a significant disadvantage. Saying that, I do think that we are very focused on ensuring we have programming that is focused on risk management rather than baseline income, but at the same time ensuring that it is looking at it from the stance of what are the risks farmers are currently facing and are the tools really currently responsive to those. And so I think it is a very different context where we see a very different regulatory environment in general in the EU, but there are certainly the net spend is significantly different between Canada and the EU, and we do see that as a concern from a competitiveness standpoint.
Thank you. To Mr. Huber, I'm a big fan of Saskatchewan. I think it's one of the most beautiful provinces I've ever been in. I drove across Canada after university, and I'd never spent any time in Saskatchewan, so I have a tremendous respect for the province as a whole and for the producers there. If you know, do you know what the current enrollment is within the producers that in any BRM programs, specifically agri-stability?
Well, can you hear me? Yeah. I think we've asked that question several times, and I would, and the number we get is probably 20% of the producers are in it, but they don't base it off numbers of actual farmers. They base it off the number of dollars enrolled or their eligible sales. So it's a little different formula, but we're losing participants every year. There's fewer and fewer people signing up, and I know in my farming operation I have two sons that have basically taken over. I could continually tell them, stay enrolled, keep paying your fees and make sure you're doing your books right, because someday we may get a payment if we're fortunate enough to get some changes made to this program. I said it would be pretty disappointing if you pulled out in the next year. You see these changes, and it would have been beneficial to your operation. So, but the number is certainly declining.
Certainly. Thank you for that. I farm, and I've never enrolled in agri-stability because my dad didn't, and we did for a little bit, but never qualified, so it became this burden on him. As you've spoken to, the margins are so incredibly slim, and I think people don't. And we talked about this in the committee, and I did last week as well, is that people are so far removed from the world of agriculture and the lifestyle of agriculture that they see the beauty of it and the commercials and all these pieces of how their food comes to be, but they don't know the tremendous amount of loss and just how slim the margins are and how some people are just holding on. So when we talk about modernization, this can be to any of the witnesses. Specifically, what would the producers like to see? I know you spoke a little bit about one single system moving through. Is there anything else you'd like to elaborate on that would be helpful for the producers to be able to access these programs? So to any of the witnesses. Certainly.
I think what we would like to see, and I think it's important to note, is we're not suggesting throwing the baby out with the bathwater here and getting rid of programs like agri-stability. I think they do work for some producers, and they do work quite well. There's certainly room for improvement on eligibility of expenses, on timeliness, on understanding of the program, which is quite complex. Saying that, I think what we would like to see as sort of the evolution of these programs is a movement to start crowding in other options and allowing farmers to have more of a choice and flexibility in what is the suite of tools that will serve their individual operation better. And that can be in agri-stability, agri-invest, your current tools, or it can be, I think we see an opportunity and a missed opportunity currently to really advance innovative program solutions that are either public sector in nature, public-private partnerships with farmers to look at what are some of the targeted risk exposures in areas where we are not seeing equitable support. And price insurance was one point we referenced at the front end. Certainly we are seeing rising concerns around access to farm business insurance, for example, and accessibility concerns there. And I think more than anything, creating a space that allows for the private sector to see a role in supplementing what we have is what's critically important. And that requires supports like catastrophic risk coverage, because that often is the point of concern for private sector entrants. Is the cost of systemic risk is just so great that it puts them out of the market altogether. And so just creating that space for innovation and more options for farmers to pick and choose is really at the heart of what we think needs to happen over time in this programming suite.
Mr. Huber, would you like to?
Yes, I would. You know, we have a program in Saskatchewan, and it's available in Alberta and some of the other provinces too that are involved. Saskatchewan Crop Insurance. Now that program works very well. It's time sensitive. If you have a yield loss on a certain crop or on a variety of crops, you put in a claim. Your claim is reviewed within days, and you have a check in the mail. And those things are so important. And I'm not saying we get rid of agri-stability or agri-invest. I'm saying that we can make them better. You know, there's an old saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. This program needs some repair. It's not totally collapsed, but we need to make changes to it so it's more time sensitive and more expenses allowed, so that producers have that opportunity where they will get some support to help them maintain. We got to realize that our family farms in the province of Saskatchewan are so important to our industry and the growth of productivity to contribute to our GDP that we really have to be cognizant of some of those things.
Thank you. We'll go to the block for 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. I'll begin with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. Last week, the Union of Agricultural Producers was here and said that the business risk management framework worked fairly well, but there wasn't enough funding because Canada invests very little in agriculture, unlike other OECD countries. The UPA believes that, or suggests, that Canada should set aside 2% of its budget to agriculture. Do you believe that that 2% should be subject to the same kind of measure as we see for military spending, having 2% as a goal? It was even discussed as a recognized national pillar in Canada and recognized as such. Should the government have an obligation to invest a certain percentage of its budget in agriculture? What's your view on that?
At a starting point, I would say, thank you for the question, that one of the critical elements we do want to see with the next policy framework is that they are setting ambitious targets for our sector. And that includes focusing on our sector as a national growth engine. And I think in doing so, we do need to talk about what is the relative level of investment we need. And there is no question, as I flagged in my earlier response, that Canada is facing an uphill battle competing globally in our agri-food sector with the level of support we see some of our major trading partners provide. But I will say at the end of the day, for business risk management specifically, these are statutory programs. And so the focus is on getting the program mix right, and the budget will follow because it will be responsive. And so it's that responsiveness that we see at the very heart of the BRM conversation specifically. I don't know, Brody, is there anything you would like to add to this?
No, I think that's it. I think part of one of the main points that we're trying to get across in our advice around the next policy framework is, as Scott mentioned in his opening remarks, that it needs to be looked at from a whole of government approach, not just agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And that means really leveraging some of the investment tools that exist in other portfolios across this government, infrastructure funding, for example, to support more proactive investments in water management, which will go a long way in preventing a repeat occurrence of certain types of negative effects on farms related to drought, et cetera. So I think that we need to be looking at tax incentives to support growth and investment in the sector, streamlining regulatory burden to support investment in value-added processing. All of these things need to be looked at in a coordinated fashion as part of a whole of government lift towards supporting the agriculture sector and Canada's food security in particular.
Vous avez fait un peu de pouce sur ma prochaine question, mais
You started in on the answer to my next question, but here it is. In recent years, extreme events like drought, fires, floods have multiplied. Then there's the world uncertainty we're seeing because of conflict, Ukraine, the Middle East. So we have the impression that every event requires a special measure when insurance programs should actually be preemptive. In your view, what agri program should be enhanced, or should there be a new one that's more agile and that can respond quickly In the event of the increasingly frequent and thus increasingly foreseeable catastrophes.
We need to take a very close look at it, in particular our disaster response framework, agri-recovery, and look at how we can make that a more timely, consistent program for farmers that are operating in times of great duress when they require this support, and uncertain about what kind of data is required, when a commitment will be made as to programming, and who will be eligible for support. And the case I cite regularly is in the drought in 2021. We saw the U.S. administration provide support very timely and quickly, and in many respects we were behind the eight ball, and what we saw as a result of that was significant feed shortages in Western Canada, competing with farmers in the United States that already had guaranteed consistent support available to them. So we do very much need to look at how can we adopt a more off-the-shelf, timely response in those very dramatic situations? And that, I think, by extension, goes back to that question of an integrated suite of programs. If that is the case, what do we have in that space, and how can we then look at ensuring products like agri-stability are better understood, have the buy-in so that they are there, and more timely through increases to interim payments and the like. So I would suggest at the heart of it, the concern is around making sure that we can respond act quickly and appropriately, and ensuring that farmers have the confidence that that support will be there when it's needed. But saying that, I think to Brody's earlier point, the critical element in this is also that we see between these extreme weather events that whole of government approach to mitigation. It's not entirely in the agri-food budget or space where those measures are needed. We need infrastructure investments. We need a long-term vision around research and innovation that can support us in those same spaces. So it really is a conversation that starts in the disaster framework but extends to a much broader whole of government approach around how do we build in more resilience up and down our value chains.
Question rapide. Dans ma région, le coût de transport est...
In my region, transportation is a brake on agriculture. Freight can cost $3,500, whereas in a place that's closer to a city, it's about $700. Should transportation costs be better recognized for farmers in remote regions?
In general, yes. I think in every respect, I think what we want to see is programming that is more responsive to the actual realities lived by farmers, and that it's responding to those concerns. And whether that's one program versus that exists already or a more tailored new approach, we just want to make sure there's space for those conversations and continued review and evolution of the programs to continue responding as we see certain areas like transportation and freight costs rise as a point of concern for farmers.
Thank you. We'll go to the Conservatives for five minutes. Thank you. Mr. Epp.
I'll begin with the CFIA. The present APF has got 5 pillars into it. Obviously, we don't know exactly how many pillars will be in the next. BRM is, the subject of this debate. Cross-compliance has come up. The CFA represents a number of organizations. Do you have a firm stand on cross-compliance between BRM and some of the other initiatives of government?
Yes, we do, and I think in simple terms, we are struggling to maintain participation in critical programs for farmers that need these tools when situations arise and require that, and any barrier to entry, whether through cross-compliance or other measures, just creates an uphill battle for programs that are already struggling to get producers engaged. So we are opposed to cross-compliance.
Thank you. We've heard testimony again at this meeting today that agri-insurance is well supported, works well, etc. AgStab does not. Would you agree with the following 2 statements, that over time AgStab has moved from a stabilization program, its original intent, to more of a disaster response, and quite frankly it's not working there, and that your producers are saying, and what I'm hearing from your testimony, we're not looking for tweaks, that we're looking for a major overhaul?
Yeah, and on the first point, no question. There was an explicit change made in roughly after 2013 to move away from income stabilization to disaster programming. But saying that, I think there is still immense misunderstanding and lack of clarity. And one of the things that we see as central moving forward is common understanding about what these programs are doing. And there is no question right now that does not exist out in at the grassroots. And on your second point, I would just Sorry, could you repeat the second question? I didn't quite capture it properly.
Basically, we're not necessarily looking at tweaks to try and fix AgStab,
Yes.
that we're looking at a major rewrite, and I heard that in your opening testimony.
Yeah, no question. We view the landscape has shifted dramatically, and we have a lot of inertia behind the existing framework that has carried through largely unevolved for much, almost 20 years now. And from our perspective, now is the moment. It's a pivotal time for our sector to really seize our growth potential, and it requires a transformative approach to how we change these programs.
A structure that has worked over time, over the decades since its inception with agri-insurance, that remains well supported, has been the insurance model. So with the stabilization approach from a margin perspective, be it either margin or gross revenue, both areas that are being looked at, why not take a look at an insurance model as a broad framework? Is that a possibility, or is that out the window from an AgStab complete overhaul?
So our premise, starting where we are today, would be that we need to be looking down those passive whole farm revenue insurance, these tools that could work very well for some farmers that feel underserved currently by the existing agri-stability program. I will say at the current moment, we would advise against throwing agri-stability out and replacing it, but certainly there's a need to explore these programs, pilot them, and test them out in real time so that we can see where they work, where they don't, and where there may be gaps that persist in those regards.
I heard the call for diversified programming because we're a very diverse agricultural scene across that country. Could you envision an AgStab program that was an insurance-based model where there was plug and play that fed into that broad framework from the different regions, from the different sectors that worked in those specific sectors?
It's certainly possible. I think the devil is in the details on all of these programs, and the question at the end of the day is, do we have the right mix of programming? So if you are to move to an insurance base, what are the new exposures that creates and concerns? And I think that's at the heart of why we see the need for transformation, as you asked earlier, is when these programs were initially designed, they were integrated. There was a sense of how Agri-Invest supported agri-stability. Over time, as those programs have been cut and evolved, that integration has been lost. And I think it's that fundamental integration that we need to see at the heart of all of these conversations.
In your testimony, you called for greater involvement potentially of the private sector. Again, in the one program in the suite that works, agri-insurance, the private sector is involved. Many people don't realize it, but it's involved in the background with the reinsurance industry, providing stability both to the producers and premium rates over time and to government, so there aren't unexpected hits to their budgets due to the catastrophes that we're hearing about. So again, going back to an insurance-based model with plug and play, is there the potential of the reinsurance industry both benefiting producers and governments in setting up a broad framework?
I think unquestionably, given the extremity of climate volatility and coupled with the geopolitical instability we see right now, we do need to be looking at every tool on the table, including what role the private sector can play in building predictability and resilience in the system. So there's no question.
AgStab has been the lack of acknowledgement of diversification on the farm for diversified risk. There are models in the U.S. that have actually actuarially mapped out that from a discount matrix for that. Again, could you see that as a possibility?
Yeah, I think that is one of those areas where we hear most frequently from our members about a point of concern with agri-stability is that highly diversified operations feel underserved by the program. And I think you can look at models like the whole farm revenue insurance pilot that was adopted in the United States. It actually had a sliding scale of higher coverage rates if you could demonstrate a higher level of diversification. And I think it's measures like that that can really see those gaps addressed with more attractive programming that'll actually bring people in. So we have programming in place when issues arise instead of requiring whole reliance on ad hoc programming in those spaces.
Next, we'll go to MP Connors for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for all the witnesses coming out. My first question is going to be to CFA. Nice to see you again, Ross. Mr. Ross. You mentioned in your opening statement that the BRM tools were designed risk profile, for a different risk profile, with growing misalignment. Can you elaborate on that just a bit for me?
Yeah, I would say what we have seen in recent years and very acutely in the last 5 years or so is this just mounting increase in geopolitical instability, creating a new set of risks for farmers, whether it's due to market closures, lost market access, non-tariff barriers to trade, that creates a new set of dynamics that were not there at the time. I will say when these programs were designed, trade compliance at the WTO and countervail risk loomed very large, and I think we have seen, in some respects, a move away from rules-based trade that creates increased risk, but also increased opportunity to potentially explore programs that can respond to that in a way that currently wasn't the case 20 years ago. Similarly, the extremity, the frequency of climate events has fundamentally changed. The idea that we now have 100-year events happening subsequent year after year is the new norm. And I think programs like Agri-Stability, where you can see your reference margin erode over that period and lose ability to get support, highlight some of the reasons that we need to take a closer look at the current risk landscape.
A couple of questions. Mr. Huber, you said, you mentioned the Saskatchewan crop insurance. Is that whole farm or is it individual crop based?
That's individual crop based. So, you may have a suite of different crops that you seed, the oil seeds, pulses, cereal grains. So those are all insured separately under the one program. So, but the problem is with them, the premiums have increased over the years. The coverage has gone up also, but it's not in line with what the actual cost of production. We're getting our fixed costs, kind of covered, but when you put the fixed and variable costs all together, the payouts generally aren't enough to really sustain that operation to make it profitable. It's sort of like long-term, pain for short-term gain. But I think when there was a gentleman over here talked a little bit about some of the programs, maybe self-insurance on things, and there is some programs out there. There's Global Ag Risk Solutions and some of those things, and they work very well. But in to get that funding in your pocket soon, it's based on an accrual system in your accounting, and it takes 16 to 18 months until that finalized return is actually evaluated and where you get any funding. So some of those things have their problems too.
So just for confirmation, under the BRM suite program, it's whole farm insurance, right?
Sorry, I missed that.
Under the BRM suite of programs, it's whole farm insurance, it's not individual crop?
It's whole, yes, certainly it is, yeah.
Okay.
But when you're diversified into say a grain and a livestock operation, that's where it kind of puts it off balance, and I think Scott mentioned a little bit about that. So you try to diversify to make your farm more viable and adaptable to some of these severe, whether it's trade or whether it's tariffs or drought or certain things like that. They're still not responsive enough.
Scott, did you want to elaborate on that either?
I think he covered the issue quite well. I would just say in general, yeah, certainly there are, this speaks to that question around diversification again, and there's certainly a concern out there that when you adopt solely whole farm programming, that there is an underappreciation for some of the costs involved in self-insuring, as you might say, through diversification, and the reality of very tight margins not being reflected adequately. And so this is why, again, we want to see some more focus on some of those areas where there are sectors that feel underserved and do not have access to the sort of equitable levels of support, to make sure that in some instances we may need to move away from that whole farm modality for certain programming needs, no question.
Okay. Mr. Hornby, in your opening remarks, you mentioned one of your recommendations would be Agri-Invest, and you said you can discuss in more detail. Do you want to elaborate on that a bit for me?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. What I was referring to was around the cross-compliance with Agri-Invest if you're over $1 million in net sales. So we administer the Environmental Farm Plan in Manitoba, which is one of the qualifying environmental risk programs that you can use in order to get that contribution from the government to qualify for the program. So we're very strong supporters of the EFP program. However, we do believe that the cross-compliance component is a bit misguided. We're trying to achieve two separate policy outcomes and requiring farms to opt into a program that perhaps doesn't fit their operation, or it's not something they have the capacity to do at this time. So while we do encourage farmers to adopt and use the EFP program, we don't believe that it should necessarily be tied to the financial components and the Agri-Invest program.
To the mayor for 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur Hubert, je viens.
Mr. Hubert, I come from a rural region with many municipalities. Farmers are often the largest business in the small community. What's your suggestion for supporting producers in more remote towns?
Oh, that's a tough question. I'm certainly not familiar with your area of the country, and your agriculture community is probably a little different than ours is. But, we have to make sure. I think one of the big things we really have to recognize is we got a product in Canada, whether it's produced in Western Canada or Eastern Canada, no matter where, it's valued all over the world. We're proud to say that we got the safest, most reliable exports, but we have to make sure that our customers get those exports and their sales to them on a timely manner. So infrastructure is very important. Labor disruptions is a huge thing that I think we have to be serious about and take a look at, whether it's port facility workers off work or even postal workers. So some of the rail services, those are so essential, and even in Eastern Canada, you've got commodities that got to get to tidewater and got to get on a ship and exported. And the happier you can keep your customers, the better off it's going to be.
Justement, je serais curieux de vous entendre sur l'impact.
I'd be curious to hear you on how important you consider these short circuits. Products from Saskatchewan or Quebec need to quickly get to restaurants and stores. Basically, consumers need access. Does the Agri-Suite encourage those short circuits? I see a lot of energy going into international marketing, but not enough into helping producers here to develop their trademarks and links with consumers. Do you believe that programs should focus more on local markets?
Yeah, I think some of these programs should focus on local markets, but at the same time, we can't ignore the bigger picture of it either. So, but that's sometimes up to our responsibility of our local municipalities and our community leaders to enhance some of those initiatives and develop some of them programs. But the both of them have to work together. And in Saskatchewan, we have 44% of the arable land, so it's a little different landscape than we have in other parts of Canada. So we concentrate on more the bigger picture, where we're exporting large numbers to other countries, where some of the other places where we have to maintain food stability, not only worldwide, but in our own country and our own jurisdictions here.
Merci.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to do Conservatives for 3 minutes, the Liberals for 3 minutes. So we'll go to Mr. Bragdon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Couple things. Obviously, there's been a lot talking about potential disruptions and ruptures and whatnot regarding our biggest and most valued trading partner to the south. And I know in agriculture, it's particularly vital and important, that relationship that we have north and south of the border. And with the efforts to diversify trade, which everyone thinks is great and wonderful, but I think there's some concerns that I'm hearing from producers in my area as well, that this relationship is prioritized and that any friction points are being addressed. And one of the things that we've heard is in the push to maybe moving more of our products over to the EU, there's a big concern being raised in that the EU has a food and feed bill which will ban crops using some crop protections and severely limit our ability to export into those markets or even allow access for Canadian crops. There are already non-tariff trade barriers that are in place for beef and pork. So I'd like to know from your vantage point, Mr. Ross, and also followed up by you, Mr. Hubert, the concerns that you're hearing from your producers as it relates to the paramount importance of our relationship for agriculture and the trade going back and forth between Canada and the U.S., and the potential huge barriers that we face in gaining further access into European markets. I'll start with you, Mr. Ross.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will defer to my colleague, Mr. Berrigan, to answer on behalf of CFA here.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So first, on Canada-U.S. trade, there's no doubt that the U.S. is Canada's largest market, and it very likely always will be. It's a very, very important market, our most important trading market. And there are very practical reasons why we cannot diversify away from that market entirely. A lot of the perishable, fruits and vegetables that we ship to the U.S. market simply cannot ship them around the world in the same way. Same thing with a lot of live, cattle and livestock. We're so deeply integrated with the U.S. market that we cannot take our eye off the ball of just how important that market is and needs to continue to be a priority. I think we do support diversification of trade. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities out there, both in expanding existing markets or potentially breaking into new ones. The EU is a tricky one for a lot of the reasons you just mentioned. In fact, we have been unable to fully utilize the market access that was negotiated through the Canada-European Union Free Trade Agreement. Last I checked, I think we've utilized 0% of our pork access and a very, very minor proportion, like single-digit percentage access of our beef market access to that market, which is largely due to non-tariff barriers to trade. It is probably one of the most significant barriers to actually taking advantage of the existing markets that we already have in place.
So, go to the Liberals for 3 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos témoins d'être.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for being with us today. I don't have much time, but I was very interested with your 4 points, Mr. Hornby, and your 6 points. Is it possible to get a bit more detail? If you could submit it in writing, because we hear a lot about about having a risk management system that would take into account the new types of risks, especially in the world market. The wars, right, that change the cost for producers. That's one aspect. Another aspect, it's the processing. How can we go get more innovation, but also to support the whole chain of production? So I will let you elaborate. I just have 3 minutes, but I'd like to, if you have any precise ideas, please don't hesitate to submit them to the clerk of the committee, because this will be very useful when we start formulating our recommendations, which will be really relevant. So I will start with Mr. Ross and then Mr. Hornby.
The question. I think when we look at value added in agriculture, it is unquestionably one of the opportunities we think we most need to seize here. And so looking at that as a tool for both building out domestic markets and global markets, it's a critical through line we see across the board. And there's no question right now that we have challenges fully realizing our potential in that space. And this again speaks to the need for an integrated whole of government approach to this issue, where we really do look at not only resilience in our sector, with BRM as a primary focal point for, but growth, and what are the conditions we need to advance there. And this is why not just the framework itself, but what goes around that is so vitally important. We need to see red tape reduction and continued regulatory modernization. And speaking with processors, more than anything, we hear our regulatory environment is the biggest impediment to growth and increases in that space. Simultaneously, as Mr. Berrigan referenced earlier, tax incentives, other tools to incentivize investment in capital modernization are critically needed to really create a conditions for growth in that space, where that has the potential to lift all boats, support farmers with more sustained, diversified revenue, but at the same time creating an opportunity to innovate and create tools and products that better serve global markets. So from our perspective, we can provide more detail in writing, certainly, but I think that is, to us, one of the fundamental pillars of where we need focus.
Merci, Monsieur.
And in 20 seconds, Mr. Hornby.
Yes, definitely happy.
Oui, nous serions heureux de vous soumettre une réponse par l'écran écrit, mais il faut comprendre que l'agriculture a changé depuis 20 ans. Il faut revoir tous les programmes offerts et voir comment on peut faire en sorte que ces programmes soient proactifs pour soutenir les agriculteurs dans leurs objectifs, pour atteindre les résultats. Nous voulons avoir plus de place sur les marchés mondiaux et renforcer notre position dans le marché américain. Et je serais heureux d'envoyer plus de détails par écrit.
I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for joining us here today. We will suspend for about 5 minutes. Thank you. asked a question directly by a member. For those participating by teleconference, please click the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of the screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I'd like to ask that all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair, pursuant to the Standing Orders 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18, 2025. The committee is resuming its study of business risk management programs in Canada's agricultural sector. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. In person, Mr. Fagan, I believe the pronunciation, farmer and butcher from Beothic
Land and Cattle Company.
Sorry. Beothic Land and Cattle Company, Mr. Herbert, President of the Herbert Group of Companies Limited, Mr. Fontaine, farmer of Famille Fontaine, Noel. You each have up to 5 minutes, and you'll be giving 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So perhaps we can start with you, sir, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Nelson Fagan, Jr. I own and operate a beef cattle farm, Beothic Land and Cattle Company. I am also a butcher and operate under N. Fagan Meats in Conception Bay South, Newfoundland and Labrador. I also grow root crops. I am the first and currently only registered pedigree Charolais cattle breeder in my province, which I'm quite proud of. They are my passion. I sat as a chair of the Newfoundland and Labrador Cattlemen's Association for 5 consecutive years. I am a relatively small farm Canada-wide, but in our small province, I am among one of the biggest beef cattle producers in my area. I am a 5th-generation farmer and butcher, and I grew up on a family farm. I raise my animals start to finish. I have an abattoir where I process my own animals as well as prepare them for consumers. My operation truly is start to finish. When I think of business risk management, I think about livestock insurance, forage production, and natural disasters. Under the current provincial livestock insurance program, livestock is only covered by death or injury due to dogs or predators. As a beef cattle producer, dogs or predators like coyotes have yet to be an issue in the province. Therefore, this type of insurance does not benefit any beef producer in the province. We need livestock insurance that will cover disease outbreak that would result in a major loss of the herd. We also need livestock insurance that would cover natural disasters like wildfires that have been more common in our province. For example, last summer we had a forest fire break out on the opposite side of the highway, adjacent to one of our summer pastures, only 6 kilometers away. It is only by the grace of God that the wind never shifted and went in our pasture direction. Had that happened, it would have wiped out my entire herd and livelihood with no protection. On the scale that I am on, there is no way to recoup from that. With regards to payouts for our current livestock insurance under the provincial government, I reviewed the numbers, and the payouts for 2026-2027 year for beef cattle. For grade and registered bulls and cows, it ranged from $400 to $650 per head. For grade and registered heifers and steers, from $200 to $400 per head. For grade and registered calves, it ranges from $70 to just $100 per head. Even if this insurance policy was covering outside predators and dog attacks, it would not be worthwhile for me to invest my time and money into this with today's cattle markets. For example, a breeding bull that the agri-insurance would give me $650 to buy back, a breeding bull at today's price is $7,500. With regards to forage production, my situation is unique from my area. I do not grow my own forage. I rely on purchasing the surplus hay from a network of my fellow producers. When it comes to climate risks, like droughts, which much of Atlantic Canada experienced last year, hay production is halted. This winter, the province introduced under SCAP the Agri-Recovery Forage Assistance Initiative. With this program, I was unable to apply. It was announced a few days before the deadline to have the hay purchased. With so many producers looking at the same time, it was scarce to find. The biggest issue with living on an island is the transport cost. It was going to cost me more to transport the hay than the purchase price of the hay. I'm sure our issues may differ from the rest of the country, But in our province, we are all facing the same challenges in the beef industry. Thank you for having me speak. I greatly appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you will take these topics into serious consideration.
Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time. Next, we'll go to Mr. Lafontaine for 5 minutes.
Oui, bonjour.
Morning, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I'm Eric Lafontaine, a cattle farmer in Dupuis in Abitibi West. On the Lafontaine Noël farm, it's a family farm that has been in existence for over 100 years. I've been co-owner of the farm with my wife since '93, and we have a herd of some 300 cows. Our daughter Corinne now wishes to continue the work that my family's built up over generations. I'm here today to talk about a catastrophe that occurred in 2023. 3 years later, it continues to have a profound impact on my farm as well as those of many beef producers in the region. First, 2023 was an unusual winter. Little snow, great deal of black ice, very early in the season. It weakened our pastures. Forest fires forced us to urgently evacuate our herd of around 800 head. And then there was a historic drought, water deficit of 220 millimeters, more severe than any seen before, even by the region's oldest producers. The consequences were devastating for all producers in the region. After an initial hay cut that was already very poor, a second cut was impossible. So to feed our animals, we were forced to use winter hay reserves to feed cows on pasture and to buy hay on a massive scale from another region at exorbitant costs. On the ground, farmers estimate their hay yield losses at around 70%, but the Financière Agricole du Québec, under the SREC scheme, assessed losses at an average of 36%. That's a shortfall in benefits and remuneration of about 34%. The system could have done better because it wasn't a technical issue but a matter of choice. When the gap between reality and data exceeds 15% of the established framework, the Financière Agricole du Québec has a duty to compensate insured producers. 3 years later, the impact on our businesses is still very much felt because the income protection system failed us. With current resources, it'll take us at least 6 to 8 years to get back to pre-2023 levels. In fact, we may never be able to make up for the loss of growth, which could affect the next generation of farmers. And our situation is far from unique, but is shared by many cattle farmers in Abitibi. One essential point must be clear. Hay is the foundation of our business because more than 2/3 of expenditure goes towards forage crops. We are just as much, if not more so, forage crop producers as we are beef producers, but it is those crops that are least well protected by insurance systems, especially when compared to grain, which are often fully compensated. With climate change, risks are going up. And what's at stake here is not just having a bad year, it's the long-term viability of our farms. In practical terms, we need to end the one-size-fits-all approach in the government's risk management programs. We need more flexibility as well as genuine contingency measures. Programs must be adapted to regional circumstances to ensure greater equity nationally. And with exceptional issues, there need to be more on-the-ground checks because all too often the interpretation of weather station data does not reflect what producers experienced. And that is the crux of the problem. Cattle farming needs some breathing space. Producers are getting older, and if we want to attract the next generation, the industry needs to become attractive and profitable again. The 2023 catastrophe made us miss out on a positive economic cycle, and that is still holding us back today. Adequately compensating farming is not an expense, it is an investment that will be recouped in the medium term through tax revenue, but above all, through stable and sustainable economic benefits in rural areas which very often rely very much on agriculture. In closing, I'm asking for one simple thing. Give us the tools that match the risks that we take. That is how we'll be able to protect our farms, support the next generation, and keep rural regions vibrant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Mr. Hebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the invite to discuss BRM. I appreciate your patience on virtual attendance as my seeders are literally driving by my office window right now to start planting our farm. So I'm here representing the Hebert Group. That includes a family farm called Hebert Grain Ventures. The first crop was in 1978, 320 acres by my father, Louis, and my mother, Karen. And this spring in 2026, we'll crop 42,000 acres. We also have an agriculture and risk finance company called Maverick Ag that deals almost directly in BRM, risk management and finance management. And one of our favorites, we offer executive education to farmers in a program called Farmer Coach to help with farm management learning. I like to joke that I'm a recovering accountant. I have a CPA by trade, so I'm addicted to numbers and data. Spent quite a bit of time in BRM, and I was the former chair of Global Ag Risk, one of the only private crop insurance options in Canada. I'll focus on grain farms, as that's what I understand best. Just wanted to outline the average cost of production on a grain farm in Canada over the last decade has increased from around $250 to $300 an acre 10 years ago to between $550 and $600 an acre in 2026. So on top of the doubling of the risk that farms take every year, we can see that policy risk in the last 5 to 7 years has still been one of the biggest challenges. A couple quick examples of that. Canola tariffs this winter dropped revenue by between $120 and $150 an acre for a 3 to 4 month period. That's just easy math of $3 a bushel times 40 to 50 bushels an acre. Considering the average grain farm is targeting a profit of around $50 an acre, a trade policy can thrust them into a loss at no management option to the farmer. Diesel fuel in the last 3 months, because of obviously the Strait of Hormuz and our neighbors to the south, has varied from as low as 81 cents a liter to $1.50 a liter. So depending on your cash flow and your storage and the timing of planting, sometimes farms can be fairly handcuffed on their costs. I could give the exact same example on fertilizer. So timing and cash flow has become of the utmost criticality to manage the farm, specifically with these policy risks. I would urge government to not only focus on food security at this point in time, but instead a national agri-food strategy that focuses on economic impact, global food security, national food sovereignty, and most importantly, productivity and resilience. It really is agriculture and food's time to shine and be a solution to our lagging productivity and economic growth to some of our global partners. Obviously, a key part of this strategy will be BRM, with discussions starting this summer on the new BRM programs with FBT. I'll provide a few high-level comments on each program, and I welcome any questions after. So obviously, agri-insurance, crop insurance, it's one of our staples. I think we need to look pretty strongly at interprovincial consistency on how some of the rules are applied and separate rules in different provinces, such as separate contracts for locations, grandfathering in previous paid premium. And it's probably about time we look at the subsidy and realize what it's actually costing the Canadian taxpayer, and are we getting the results from the program we want. Agri-Invest, it's not a welcome opinion in some of my farm peers, but I actually think we should get rid of the $10,000 matching and turn Agri-Invest into a tax-deferred income smoothing account, where when as farmers we put money in the account, that's a write-off, no different than how we do now by buying fertilizer cattle, and we take money out, it's income. I think that can help farms manage their taxes. I think can help government let government know how the actual industry is performing, and not only, it would also help reserves and banks. Agri-Stability, I'll say right up front, I'm a huge fan of Agri-Stability. I think it's the best program that you guys offer. I realize that's not always widely held. The accounting industry has not helped the government's ability to implement Agri-Stability. The accounting industry tends to cause the lack of timing and the slowness of payments. So I have a number of instances I would change in agri-stability, such as eliminating caps, allow enterprising accounting, etc. I have a transformative change idea where I go to a private-public system with a voucher. But last two, as I'm running out of time, I also think in BRM, I would strongly urge you to look at the CALA program, the Canadian Agriculture's Loan Act, which has government-backed loans to 95% and a $500,000 max that should be adjusted and tied into new BRM talks. And I truly believe we have a succession and transition opportunity, not a problem. But there's a number of tax things that have been put in over the last decade that have made it very tough. We need to look at capital gains, the 21-year trust rules, taxable capital, corporate partnerships, and Section 85 expansion. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much to all of our witnesses. I'll go to the Conservatives for 6 minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Mr. Lafontaine. As I understand it, you had a drought in 2023. You lost a great deal of your forage. And the BRM programs didn't work for you. You left a tremendous amount of forage because you have a large herd. 3,000 head would need about 2,000 tons a year. The program is so broad that it takes a great deal of revenue, but a loss of forage for the program isn't a loss of revenue because you did sell animals, and perhaps you sold even more than you would have because you didn't have enough forage. So what exactly happened so we can understand? At the beginning of the season, we saw a drought begin really at the beginning of the season. In Abitibi, we usually have much more water. So there was no water at all at the start of the season, and we kept saying it's going to rain, and then it didn't. So we needed to buy hay. We needed the hay we had grown to feed animals on the pasture. What we needed was the liquidity to buy hay because we knew that everybody would be buying hay and would be buying fodder. So we did put pressure on La Financière Agricole to have some advance payments, and we finally got them in August. And when everyone's looking for hay, you have to move quickly. So a reduction in the number of head. We had 350 cows. We sold about 50 so that we could get through the winter with the hay we had. But now it's catching up to us because now we have 50 head less that we can sell, and that's less revenue. So and we didn't get much compensation. Selling part of the herd meant that our revenue has dropped even more. I don't know if that answers your question exactly. We understand as well that transportation costs aren't included in the compensation for hay in Quebec's harvest insurance, but the federal Business Risk Management Program takes account of the average expenses for the farm. It doesn't take into account the kind of climate problems you had regionally. If there'd been a way to set an amount regionally because you couldn't buy hay from your neighbors, they needed it as much as you did, you could buy from further away, but then transportation costs would have shot up. Is there a way that we could look at this from the perspective of a regional climate problem? Well, there is agri-recovery, but it usually comes in much later. We did meet with Minister Macaulay at the time, And he said he couldn't do much because, well, the only thing he could do was speak to Minister Lamontagne, because it was Minister Lamontagne who had the authority to unlock compensation from La Financière. But I'm paying high harvest insurance premiums, and we wanted harvest insurance to compensate us, but it never made up for losses. And the minister said he couldn't do anything. Maybe he didn't go see the right person. In 1995, the Conservative government under Brian Mulroney had a significant drought in Quebec to deal with, and it gave all producers money for fodder, those who were insured and those who were not. So it is possible for governments to do something. They said no to you, and I find that difficult to swallow. I find it difficult that the sitting government didn't want to help you. The programs exist. They don't want to change them or modify them. They could have set up an ad hoc program to help the region, and they didn't. And now you're saying that, unfortunately, the government in power at the time did nothing. Yes, that's exactly it. I can't put it any other way. Thank you, Chair. Do I have any time left?
C'est tout. C'est assez pour moi, monsieur.
And that's it. Thank you.
Joanne, for 6 minutes. Let me figure this out.
Merci à vous tous d'être ici.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing your experiences with business risk management programs and other agricultural issues. My question is for Mr. Hébert. Your position is one we rarely hear. I was surprised by a number of your proposals, but I find them very interesting. This is the first time I'm hearing a suggestion like yours on agri-investment. Could you please elaborate on how you believe we could improve agri-investment to help producers become more resilient?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'm not going to disagree with you. It's not, my ideas aren't always that wide stream sometimes, but so the reason I struggle with Agri-Invest currently is, as I said, it's a $10,000 matching the minute you qualify for that. So it's implemented differently on every size of farm, right? And really, it's 100% return on the farmer's money given to them by the government, of which then a lot of times we hear complaints because they have to pay tax on free money when they take it out. So my personal opinion is let's take it away. However, one of the greatest advantages agriculture has is cash to accrual accounting. We can file tax on cash basis. So at a lot of good years for farms, they go buy cattle or they buy fertilizer before the end of the year to reduce their tax bill. It's deferred income smoothing. We're allowed to do it. I think we should be able to use Agri-Invest. So instead of giving the money to a different farmer or a retail, let's put money in Agri-Invest. It's deductible. We can invest it. Let's not just have it invest at 1%. Let's call it a 3 or a 5% guaranteed investment, but that the government and the banks work together. So therefore, we get our win by the tax savings over the years when we do that. When we take that money out, it's taxable. So we can manage when we're going to pay tax on that when we have a weaker year. I would argue that is what Agri-Invest is meant to be, is to build up a self-insurance fund to help us in a bad year, right? I also think it's a bit of a win for the government. If you have billions of dollars in Agri-Invest that has been put there by farmers to pay less tax, to save money for poorer years, that's a pretty good indicator that the industry is in a good spot. Specifically, if they have to say I'm a grain farmer or a cattle farmer or a dairy farmer, right? If there's no money in Agri-Invest because it has all been pulled out and they've been willing to pay tax on it in order to help their situation in a bad year, you guys will know the industry is not in a good spot. So I think it's a win for farmers. I think it's a win for the government. And lastly, I'm sure it's a win for banks because they seem to love billions of dollars of our money in it, both the government's and mine.
Merci beaucoup. Une perspective vraiment intéressante.
Thank you. That's a very interesting point of view. You made a number of suggestions in your opening statement, so I would invite you to submit all your proposals in writing to the committee so that we can take them into account. you have a great many ideas and you've thought about them a lot. So if you would kindly submit them to us in writing, it would be very useful to us and I believe very helpful in the report we're going to be drafting. Now, on agri-recovery, we have questions about the speed of response. In BC, we tried, or what was tried was to provide a percentage of the assistance on a preliminary assessment with adjustments to be made later after a full assessment. Do you think that could be adapted on a broader scale to take into account all situations where agri-recovery is needed?
So for sure, I think agri-recovery could be adapted. I mean, my perfect world is that we have 2 or 3 programs that are good already and we don't have to do agri-recovery. Agri-recovery means that we're having to do ad hoc, which means we have something wrong or something's come up that we haven't thought about, right? So for instance, if an agri-stability program is built correctly and allows enterprise accounting so that, operations that have separate units aren't being penalized, and you have early payments allowed in agri-stability, which today's world of bookkeeping is significantly different, right? We do the books on a 40,000 acre farm in less hours than we used to on a 1,000 acre farm. And now farms need to step up and do a better job of having books done correctly, right? But I think technology would allow government to do in-term payments very rapidly through a well-run agri-stability program with some changes that I think, to be honest, has potential to not to disrequire agri-recovery. Now, you're going to have the odd one because of a major event or, an industry that has 4 or 5 back-to-back years because their margins would be gone. But as I said, in a perfect world, we should adjust our current programs that agri-recovery is not needed as often.
Merci, puis ça m'amène à une question plus générale.
Thank you. That takes me to a more general question. I seem to understand that over time, over the years, business risk management programs have been used in exceptional situations, and now these are becoming more structural risks. We're seeing increasing number of climate events and disasters. Do you share my analysis? Is this an issue that affects our business risk management programs? They aren't well adapted to the climate risks that farmers face now.
The agri-insurance program is set up for climate risk. And I mean, for us in Saskatchewan and Western Canada, that is mainly drought or too wet, right? And I'm pretty lucky. I farm in an area where I've been affected by drought once, and I own way too many $1,000 tow straps to pull my equipment out because we're too wet, right? So that's the climate events we deal with. I think personally that the biggest issue with the programs is that they haven't adapted to the rapid increase in the cost of production. And for instance, agri-stability specifically, a $3 million cap is one of the craziest ideas I've ever heard of. There's no
I'm going to
cap
have to stop you there. We're over time. Sorry about that. We'll go to the block for 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Eric, I'm particularly proud of being able to hear you here today because together a few years ago, we did go through that perfect storm with the early winter ice and then the drought in BTB West, and that caused a catastrophe. Had to move herds and take all kinds of measures. There's also the psychological burden and the weight on farmer wellness. You were at the head of initiatives along with Maxime Mathieu and Alexandre. This is the red letter that I allowed myself to bring. It starts with a petition signed by almost all Abitibi West producers. In this letter, you sound the alarm. You wanted to be heard. You wanted to put your region on the map because you were not on the radar. The programs were not triggering, and the consequences were extremely harmful. So you said it clearly in your opening statement, but could you elaborate on the consequences? As my colleague Jacques Gourde said, you're still seeing consequences on your pastures. Yes, absolutely. The drought was so severe that our pastures, our older pastures, completely died off. There's no forage on them anymore. But we still have a herd to feed. And we can't replant all our pastures at the same time. It costs practically $200 an acre to replant the pastures, and we have about at least 1,200 acres. So that's what I was saying. It'll take 5 to 6 years to get back to where we were, replant new pastures, and now we have additional costs to replant them. We're still buying hay as well because our pastures can't fulfill the herd's grazing needs. And now we have 50 head less than we did before that, and that amounts to almost $200,000 in income that we no longer have. Together, we met Minister Macaulay at the time. That meeting, well, he did listen to us, and he heard us, but that wasn't reflected in action. So people who are listening here from the department know that they have a responsibility. We were basically told something along the lines of, we provide guidelines, it's up to others, in other words, Quebec, to put them into place. So you had a very similar response from Quebec. They said, well, given the framework we have, we can't do much. So at the end of the day, the person who has to deal with the consequences is you. But some actions did change. I remember going to see you, and you showed me the figures, how governments have adjusted programs and the impact that had on you and your farm. I'm trying to put my ideas in order. The impact that meeting the minister had, well, we showed him figures, but in the end, it didn't lead to much. The government ended up by providing compensation that it thought was adequate, and then there was a ministerial initiative in Quebec to top it up because they couldn't find a way to really solve the problem, and they didn't want to reopen the harvest insurance program. They should have, because there was a 15% difference between the weather station data and what was happening on the ground. In paying insurance premiums, I expect the insurance to pay up. If my house burns down, I expect insurance to pay for rebuilding, not just half the cost. So your needs would have been double or triple what you got, and you were offered what? A maximum of $50,000 or $135 a head, and that absolutely failed to meet what you needed. Then calculations were adjusted. Now, there was some rain on May the 1st or June the 1st. So the government decided there was no water problem, even though the fields were quite visibly dry as dust. So what impact has changing indicators had on the profitability of your farm? Well, they did adjust the program along the way, but they cut compensation by roughly half. So the program still doesn't respond. It was actually worse. It is actually worse than it was before. So there's an impact on the link between your needs and what government believes your needs are.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to start with Mr. Fagan. You were talking about the importance of programs like a livestock insurance program. Conservatives, we've been pushing for a national insurance program for quite some time. It's good to hear that it may be implemented as early as tomorrow. But I would assume that market certainty would also be very important to you as a producer. The current government allowed the United Kingdom ascension or ascension to the CPTPP. Beef imports from the United Kingdom are up 150% over 1 year, with zero Canadian beef going to the United Kingdom. The government is now looking at, in the next few months, signing a trade agreement with Mercosur, which is Brazil, Argentina. Imports of low-quality, cheap Argentinian and Brazilian beef into Canada is up 300%, despite a 26% tariff. I think this could be devastating to the Canadian cattle industry if the government signs a free trade agreement, which would eliminate that tariff. We would see a massive influx of, again, low-quality South American beef into Canada, which would displace Canadian products that are produced at a much higher standard. Would this raise some concerns with you as a cattle producer, the impact that this could have on your business?
Well, with regards to marketing, there is no federal slaughterhouse at home. We're all provincially regulated, so we sell within our province. I have my market secured. I travel around rural Newfoundland. I have 21 stores carrying my products, and we're counting. Keeping the animals on the island and me attaining them at a fair price is the problem. As for the rest of the country, the boys are going to be in trouble if that happens.
Well, and they would be bringing in Brazilian beef into slaughterhouses here, or trim, mixing with Canadian beef and spreading it across, selling it across the country. So there's not a part of the country that would be, safe from this. But thank you very much for that answer. I'm going to pass the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Bonk.
Right, I have a question for Christian Hebert. A few years ago, we were chatting, and I remember you said the biggest risk to my farming operation is government policy at the time. And then we sat down and we talked a lot about private insurance as opposed to government-funded insurance. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about your experience, because you've dealt a lot in that industry. You understand it very well. Could you maybe compare the two, what we currently have with our BRM products that are funded by the government and those that are private?
Yes. So, I mean, the main private product that most people understand is hail insurance, right? But really, there's Global Ag Risk, and there's another one called AGI3 they're variations of agri-stability or a revenue insurance. They work quite well at building around the current government programs. The detriment to private, if we wanted to take away a bunch of the liability and operational risk, is the subsidy for crop insurance is so astronomical that the federal and the provincial government pay. So if I was to give you what I would do for transformative change, I would go to a voucher type system. So I would make the provincial crop insurance companies run as subsidiaries, no different than SaskTel has to run as a subsidiary in the Saskatchewan province and compete against Bell and Rogers. And as a farmer, as I decide which insurance works best for me, I buy it, I submit my receipt, and I get the exact same subsidy, whether I buy private, whether I buy crop insurance, whether I buy agri-stability. And I think that would allow, you would see private products build, not just, they wouldn't replace government insurance, but they would build products that work very well for different types of operations and regional different changes all around the government programs, and remove liability and improve timeliness on some of the stuff. I think on top of that, you could really look at reinsurance diversification. I think the federal government could look at taking on catastrophic risk from a reinsurance standpoint for all of the products combined, and through that diversification would probably get significantly better reinsurance rates for both the private companies and themselves.
Could you maybe expand on the reinsurance side of it? So we had that in the first round where we talked a little bit about it. Maybe just expand on that and how you think that could spread risk across. It would just help us with minimizing our risk.
Yes. So in the world of private insurance, I mean, most companies wouldn't be large enough to take on all that risk, so they sell that reinsurance risk to farmers, or to reinsurers around the world, sorry. Mm-hmm. You get a better reinsurance rate based on claiming less, your client book claiming less, and spread of risk. If you only have a very concentrated group of farms in Southeast Sask, you're going to pay more reinsurance. If you have farmers in all the way across the country, BC, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and out east, you can see better reinsurance rates because the total claim across the whole country will be less than a specific region. I think it's a critical piece for the catastrophic risk, the 1 in 50, 1 in 100, 1 in 200 risk for both the government and private.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Mr. Conish for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming out, and especially to Mr. Fagan for coming up to us to present some thoughts on the BRM programs. Mr. Fagan, in Newfoundland Labrador, from your experience as president of the Cattlemen Association and Newfoundland Labrador Federation of Agriculture, is there a large participation rate in the BRM suite of programs in Newfoundland Labrador?
I would not say no. No. I would like to see, I think that there's not a lot of people that would be aware of this whole thing and the finer details of it and take advantage of it.
Do you think it's cost prohibitive, or the programs don't suit the smaller farms in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Smaller farms, no. They would have to have capital to put into it first.
Okay. Going back to the livestock insurance, and I mean, you briefly spoke about this. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, the challenges that you have with the livestock insurance?
The livestock insurance challenges for me would be the only thing they cover is dog or predator. We have climate change is changing all the time, and we had 1, 2, 3 forest fires in the last 2 years right next to my barn. And I mean, I have farm insurance in my barn, but we're so safety. Like if a fire broke out in my barn and the animals in the barn are covered. But to be honest with you, I feel we have a higher probability of losing my animals to a forest fire on one of the community pastures.
So have you investigated any insurance that would cover that? Does the BRM suite of programs cover that?
Not through you guys. Privately, I have. I did call one in 2021. I reached out to a insurance company. I forget them at the time, the name of them, but they were in Saskatchewan. And I was purchasing a pedigree Charolais bull and bringing him home. And they would cover, I asked about like past animal insurance in general, and the only thing they would cover in my area was the transport to get him to my farm. After that, I was on my own. They didn't have any programs for me.
So you mentioned like the climate change issues and the forest fires. I'll ask a question on forest fires. If your cattle had to be affected by the forest fires last year, that would have wiped your business out.
I'm done. Yeah. And at today's markets, to buy in, like I mean, a feeder calf now goes $3,800 at 7-8 months of age. I cannot afford to retain him and feed him for the next eight months and get a carcass out of that in my market. I'm better off just shipping him. But at the same time, to buy in the feeder, the breeding stock is just as much, and then there's the transport to Newfoundland.
I wanted to go to the forage issue that was in Newfoundland, Labrador last year, most of Atlantic Canada, probably good parts, a lot of Canada. All of Canada, yeah. Excuse me. The agri-recovery kicked in to allow for people to participate in after the fact. And you mentioned that in your, I don't know if it was in your opening statements or answer to a question previously. Did you benefit from that, or do you know farmers that benefit from it, or what would be the reasons why you never benefited from it?
Well, the reason I never benefited from it was I got the email 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, and I had to have hay sourced, transportation arranged, and the invoice by end of the day Friday. So, and when you had no one to go to and start sourcing it, 3 days is not a lot of time to source hay, arrange transportation, have it paid for. So that was one reason. I am aware of one beef producer in my area that did take advantage of it. And there's another one, I believe he did also. I have not spoken to him directly. I've heard he has, but I don't know everyone. But so up to 2 beef people I know of.
Do you think as climate change affects, or climate changes, and it's going to impact your businesses? Do you?
Absolutely. I did not mention, but well, as you know, I am the chair and vice chair of 2 community pastures in my area, which we use, where I micromanage them with several other beef producers. This past summer, I've been using one pasture since my childhood, and I now run it. And this past July, I walked that pasture with my tennis shoes, and the grass crunched like maple leaves in the fall on your lawn. Never see the pasture like that. And we thought we were done. It wasn't going to recuperate. So there's no, it did come back, although poorly. However, we've thought about doing different things, but Newfoundland is rocky and it's hilly. And so we did this past March take advantage of doing some frost seeding. So we're interested to see where that goes. And maybe we took over these pastures from people, had them 30 years and nothing was done with them. So we're trying to build them up. And hopefully things will change at fertilizer.
Thank you.
Okay, yep.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. We'll go to the block for the last 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Lafontaine, Éric.
Thank you, Chair. Eric, Mr. Lafontaine, I'd like to hear you talk a bit more about insurance. 40% premiums, 100, 1,000 deductible. The first 15% is the responsibility of the producers, and you need to have lost at least 100,000 for it to trigger. 18,000 a year to be insured, whether it pays out or not. Is this good for you? And if not, what would an ideal system be? Well, what's missing at the moment is recognition of regional conditions. The system relies on weather station data without coming to see what's happening on the ground. If analytical tables from the weather station aren't showing the right data, it won't work. The whole system doesn't work. So unless there's somebody on the ground to see what's really happening there, it doesn't work. We've already seen 10% deductibles. Every time you get an insurance payment, the deductible goes up. But with every climate event, the risks go up. And we need to find a way to make sure farmers are protected without having to pay out 100,000 before any help comes, because we can't keep going like this. You're north of Dupuis. The nearest weather station is how far from you as the crow flies? The closest one is right next door. It's on our farm. So the data should really reflect what's happening, but they're not reliable? Well, it's reliable in terms of the data it produces, but the analytical grids aren't reliable with regard to their output. Well, in Abitibi and Témiscamingue, there are a lot of farms where the nearest weather station is about 50 kilometers away. Last question, what's the impact of not having a provincial or federal slaughterhouse in your region? What's the impact on your production? The major problem is that you end up with a lot of shipping. What we would need are shorter circuits to sell to clients in the region. So you have to ship it to a slaughterhouse 800 kilometers away and then ship it back. So we're talking a lot about short circuits. That's not happening.
And I just thank all of our witnesses for joining us here today, virtually or in person. We do appreciate you providing your insight and advice to the committee. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.